I'm going to share some simple garden design tips. My experience expands over 20 years, with a degree in garden design and a diploma in horticulture.
It's a perfect day to be inside designing while it's raining outside, and I'm pretty obsessed in garden design. I think if you're considering planning your garden and creating a new space, it's really important to plan in advance what you're going to do and get it down on paper. It's far easier to make mistakes on pen and paper than it is on the ground while landscaping, and it's good to have that overall vision of what you're wanting to achieve. There's lots of different styles, there's lots to consider in terms of what function you want the garden to have.
I'm going to show you 6 design elements: garden layout, planning your garden, function and style, focal points, formal and informal gardens, and finally designing with plants.
Now anyone can get a piece of paper out, and you don't have to be a designer, you don't need to be an artist, and you can plan from above what you want your garden to look like. How it is perceived from ground level, so from eye level, is often very, very different, and that's a big mistake people make. You can create a design and it can look lovely from above, but that is not how you're going to view it. So it's important to try and consider what it looks like from the ground, and you can often translate that. If you've created just a little bit of something on paper, you think, right, that's what I want. Go outside with some string lines and some spray paint and mark it out and see whether the layout works for you. I'll give you some examples of how different it can look. So if I was to just show you this design here, when you look at it from a bird's eye view, this was planned, this was done a good 20 years ago. When you look at it from above, you can see there's a path running all the way through it. But if I show you a perspective drawing of what it looks like, you can see here it's a completely different view, and getting that idea from the bird's eye view design is really difficult to translate across. And so when you're viewing it from down on the ground level, it actually appears quite different. So it's really important to consider that when you're doing your design as well.
Here's another example. This garden was planned with a swimming pool, an entertaining space and some decking, an area of artificial lawn with some white pavers installed. There was plenty of depth allowed for the tropical planting. It's early stages as the garden is still work in progress, but here's some images of how it turned out.
I'm now going to show you function and style. Before you even start planning where stuff's going to go in the garden, you need to work out what your must-have list is. So if I take this one for an example here.
Within most gardens, you need to consider where your paths are going to go. Do you need access from your front door to your back door? Do you need a path that's going to take you to the bottom of the garden? This needs considering quite early on in the planning process. The clients wanted a grand entrance with a formal garden that could be viewed as you access the front door. And then, do you want a lawn as well, and what is the lawn used for? In this case, these clients had children, so they needed some large open spaces where a ball could be kicked around. Most people have a criteria that they're going to want an outdoor sitting area, so here we've got a deck and we've got a sitting area with a pergola over the top, which is going to create some shade, because this particular client wanted some shade. It's not on everyone's list due to finances, but this client wanted a swimming pool, which was positioned in an area of full sun. The barbecue area was positioned away from the house, as this suited the owner's brief. These are just some of the functional items of this garden.
So this is another garden that I designed for a client, and you can see on this plan here, the table and chairs, they're directly outside the kitchen. I mean, it's often quite sensible that if you're going to have a space that you're going to dine in the garden, you quite often don't want it too far away from the house. You don't want to be going back and forward with your food and your plates. I know it can seem like a good idea to be tucked away at the back of the garden, but it's not always very practical. So just having your table and chairs and your dining area close to the house is really useful. So this garden also takes you on a little bit of a journey. So you've got this access pergola walkway that you walk underneath, and your eye is immediately led down to this focal point right in the middle, which is a water feature. And so as you walk down there, it's enticing you around. You have to walk around the edge of the focal point to get to the secondary sitting area. This client did want to have an area in the garden they could escape away to. So of an evening they wanted somewhere they could go and sit and have a drink and socialise with friends. So this garden also needed to have a real practical purpose. You know, the client needed a shed, they needed compost bins, they wanted a vegetable garden. And so on this plan, I've tucked it towards the end of the garden and it's fenced off and it's out the way. Often these utility areas, they're not the best looking, but you do need them in a garden. And so they quite often, in most cases, end up at the end of the garden tucked away, because the garden immediately around the house, you want to be looking visually nice. And so the areas that have to have this function as a utility area, it's better to have them tucked away. Work out what it is exactly that you need in your garden. Get your criteria, and that's your start point. And then you can move forward to the next stage. So let's talk about focal points. Now, what is a focal point? A focal point is quite often a feature in the garden that your eye is drawn to. Or it could be simply your path goes directly down the garden and your eye is leading right down that path to the end. So what's going to go at the end of the path? Because that's the focal point. So if this is just a dead end in a fence, it's not going to be very appealing. And so when you're designing your garden, you can plan where you want your focal point to be. So if I take this one as an example, this was a front garden. So this client wanted to install a water feature, and that was obviously probably going to be the main focal point of this garden. Initially they wanted it up close to the house. But this garden is going to be viewed from many angles, so you can access it from the road, the driveway, as you come out the front of the house. So it just seems sensible and logical to put the focal point right in the middle of the garden, and then everything expands out from that. So if you view this garden from, no matter what angle you view this garden from, you've got that central focal point in the middle. A focal point can be anything. It can be a table and chairs at the end of the garden. It could be a real feature specimen tree. And there can often be lots of focal points in a garden. While discussing garden style, it's important to mention informal and formal gardens. So what are the difference between these two? So I've got an example here. So a formal garden is often very symmetrical, often lots of straight lines. You can see in this plan here, if you were to divide it down the middle, it's symmetrical on either side. This has got lots of structured clipped plants and it's very organised. And then even when you look at the garden from the other side, you enter the property through the entrance, you've got this pergola that goes straight down the garden, and either side it's symmetrical. You've got these box balls, you've got these large hedges that are protruding out at an angle, which are drawing your eye in between each section as you walk down through the garden. And then an informal garden, I guess this is probably quite a good example here. I showed this one earlier on, but you can see in this garden it's not really symmetrical. You've got curves, you've got lots of loose grasses, you've got some bamboo sticking up. In an informal garden, if you were to think of a wildflower meadow, that would definitely be an informal garden. In an informal garden, you've often got lots of curves, it's not symmetrical, and it can be a little bit more wild looking. And so you need to decide, do you want that very structured look, lots of straight lines in a formal garden, or do you want a nice loose informal garden where perhaps the plants do a little bit more of the work than the hard landscaping? Designing the plants, this is the fun part. And there's a lot to consider, especially if you're inexperienced with plants. You know, some plants like shade, some like sun, some like well-drained soil. And so it's important, if you're not experienced with plants, go and ask at your local garden centre or whoever your plant supplier is. Get some advice, tell them your location, and try and build yourself up a planting palette of what you like. Over the years as a garden designer, what I've realised with planting, what really works, is repetition. It's really easy to get carried away with planting. You can go to a garden centre and go, oh, I love this plant, I love this plant, I love this plant. And you want to put a little bit of everything in. And your garden can start feeling really disjointed. So the starting point quite often for me when I'm designing a garden is the trees, the big structural plants. Even in a small garden, don't be scared to use trees, you know. When you're sitting in a garden, it's not very comfortable in a large open space. You feel more comfortable when you're immersed and you're surrounded with planting. So once you've planned where your trees are going to go, you then want to start thinking about your other structural plants. So you're really looking at what the bones of your garden are going to be. So quite often your structural plants, or they certainly are in my case, are quite often evergreen plants. They're going to be there all year round. And you position them throughout the garden. Again, make sure you create balance, make sure you use repetition. So if you start by positioning those bits, you've then got all this space in between. And that's when you can start infilling with perhaps some of your smaller planting that goes in between. You start with your larger stuff, you're now going to move down to your smaller stuff. So if you've planned on paper very roughly what you're wanting to achieve, where you're wanting your plants to go, you can then go out and purchase your plants. And that doesn't need to be the end of the process. You don't need to rigidly stick to what you've planned. Even myself as a garden designer, I design something and then you realise you get on site, oh actually it looks a little bit better if I just swap those two around. So then get your plants, go out into the garden, place them all out. Get all your plants in one go. Don't start planting little bits at a time. Place them and then stand back and look and make sure it's creating a style and a look that you're wanting. This is a garden for you at the end of the day. That was a very quick garden design overview. There's so much more that I could tell you. And I haven't finished yet. I will be uploading some more videos. So if you're interested, just subscribe. I will go into some more detail about some of the other garden design elements.